Welcome to the St. Gallen Wings of Excellence Award. It's one of the highlights of the annual gathering here at St. Gallen. It's now about my 13th year, so I'm amazed at how the talent just continues year after year after year, and just the standard is just phenomenal and seems to just keep improving. That's no reflection on any of the previous students, I hasten to add, as they are here as well. So many essays from around the world are submitted for this particular competition, the essay competition. A remarkable talent pool from around the world takes part, indicating, of course, how valuable it is to be a part of the St. Gallen family, even if it's through the competition. And it's amazing the standard of the essays, too. This year, the question submitted, for which they submitted was, is it as good as it gets? What approach would you suggest to change the current purpose of capital? Of course, we're all looking very much at the value of capital now, and it's a discussion that we're handling over these 2 days. As always, amazing ideas, which you're going to hear about in just a moment. And I always think about the relationship students have with their professors, as I'm going to be inviting a professor up in a minute. I heard a story of how this one particular, very strict professor at a university made it clear that when he moderated an exam, that the student should arrive on time, and it's very strictly kept to that schedule. So he told his students, we've got an exam coming up, where you'll be writing for 2 hours. You have to be here by 12 o'clock, and we end at 2 o'clock exactly. So, of course, the students were nervous about this. Sure enough, students came in, sat down, in plenty of time, they started writing. And at 2:15, this young man just walked in, grabbed the paper, sat down, and started writing. And the professor was so incensed. He wanted to say something. I can't believe this young man has the audacity to do this. Let's see what happens. So he let the exam continue. At 2 o'clock, hit the buzzer. Everyone put their pens down and came up and started piling their papers up on his desk at the front, except this young man who carried on writing. Again, I can't believe this. So he sat there, let's see what happens. All the other students piled out. At 2:15, this young man got up with his paper, and he came up, about to put it on the table, and the professor said, do you think I'm seriously going to accept your essay? You've come in 15 minutes late. I told you we start on time. You've done 2 hours, but you came in 15 minutes late. The young man said, do you know who I am? And the professor said, no. He said, no, seriously, do you know who I am? The professor said, no, I don't know who you are, and I don't care. So he said, good, and he lifted the papers and he shoved his in the middle. So, please, all you students, don't do that. I will be shot if you do. Now, it's my honor to invite up a professor, not involved in that story, I hasten to add, who's a leading professor from Harvard University. She's been recognized as one of the top 10 thinkers in the world, specializing in leadership, globalization, and innovation, and has been teaching innovation for 20 years plus. She was on the board of directors of the Rockefeller Foundation, among others, and she does her research, as she explained to me, always with a young person, giving them the chance, when she does her research and writes, to be a partner in that project, which is an incredible honor and a great opportunity for that young person. So please, a very warm welcome to Professor Linda Hill. Sorry, I go.
I have now become very suspicious of you. I cannot believe you'd give that kind of idea to innovative students like we have out here. I'm a little bit troubled by that. It's truly a pleasure to be with you today. I must say I became a business professor because I'm interested in economic development and how we can use business to improve the lives and livelihoods of all of us, to include the most marginalized. So when I received an invitation to be with young business leaders who want to make a positive difference in the world, I had to say yes. That is exactly what inspires me. So it's a privilege to be here, and I'm very humbled to be able to share the stage with the winners of such an important and prestigious competition. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them as well. So what I'd like to do is talk with you about the following. It is very clear, and I'm speaking to all of us, but particularly to the young people here, that you have moral imagination. Your essays, the fact that you've put together this conference is evidence of that. But as your own peers have told you, it doesn't matter if you have imagination. We have to figure out how we turn that imagination into reality. And to do that depends upon your own individual and collective leadership. You have to be able to lead innovation. And I will tell you that leading innovation can be fun, but it's mostly very hard work and often is quite scary. So that's what I would like to talk with you about today. And given that in the essays anyway, they understand that what we have to do is really address systemic factors if we're going to change the relationship between business and society, you all have to be able to build and lead an ecosystem of very diverse stakeholders. You have to get them to be willing and able to come up with innovative solutions. Now, most of the stakeholders, and maybe all of the stakeholders, since you're still students, are individuals or groups over whom you have no formal authority. But it doesn't matter that you don't have any formal authority, because as any CEO will tell you, you cannot force people to innovate, you cannot tell people to innovate, they must volunteer to do so. So you are just fine, even though you don't have formal authority yet. Now, for the last 10 years, I've been very focused on looking at the connection between leadership and innovation, because much to my surprise, there's not much research that looks at that connection. There's a ton of work on innovation, there's a ton of work on leadership, but not on the connection between the two. So my collaborators and I, one of whom you understand is a young person, she was 20 when I met her. She's still a millennial, but she's getting older, and I like that. Makes me feel better. I've been a professor for over 30 years, so I'm a little older than what you said there, so not just 20 years. But she is a full collaborator, and I want to tell you about one of my other collaborators who I've been working with the longest. Now, he is not in a social enterprise. He worked with Steve Jobs at Next, and when Steve Jobs bought Pixar from George Lucas, he asked Greg to become the chief technology officer of Pixar and help scale Pixar. So he did that for 14 years, and then he went and helped integrate Pixar into Disney, and then he became my business partner. He's always been my research partner, but he decided we should be in business together. As far as I'm concerned, we haven't made any money, but we're still doing research and creating IP, and I'm just fine about that because I'm an academic, but of course he's a business person. So he is the person, when I say we, Emily and Greg are the people that I do my work with, and I think it's very important to acknowledge them, and we continue to do research together. But what we set out to do was to study exceptional leaders of innovation, men and women who had built teams, organizations, or ecosystems that were able to routinely innovate. That's what we wanted to study. Now, I am not an economist. I'm an organizational anthropologist. And one of the things that I love to say, because I'm just picking on the economists in the room, because I love economists. I went to the University of Chicago with lots of St. Gallen students as well. And what I love to say is, why do you all get to decide who's rational and what's rational? Who said the economists get to determine, that? That has always confused me. It's been a question that I still want to ask when I've had a few drinks. So I'm an anthropologist. And I think people are always logical. We just don't understand what it is they're trying to optimize when they're doing what they're doing. I don't think people are ever particularly irrational. So that's the point of view of an anthropologist. But when we went out to study these exceptional leaders of innovation, what we found, much to my surprise, is that how they thought about leadership and what they did was different from what we were teaching at the Harvard Business School. And of course, that makes me very nervous. In fact, what they thought of as great leadership was not what most of us think of conventionally as great leadership. So we need the younger generation to help those of us from my generation to think differently about what we're up to and to really reward people for maybe different kinds of behavior that is the kind of leadership that we need for today. Because the leaders that we studied who built organizations that could routinely innovate, they did not see their job as coming up with a vision and making sure people fulfilled that vision. Instead, they saw their job as creating a space where people could come together and do innovative problem solving together. And coming together was both about having the willingness, volunteering, and also the capability, being able to actually do it. So what we actually saw was really the reality of what we've always known about innovation. And that is, innovation does not happen because some individual has an aha moment. Most innovation is bottom up. It's about unleashing the talents and passions of individuals and then harnessing those for the collective good. So innovation is a journey. It's a kind of collaborative problem-solving journey, usually with people who have different experience and different expertise. It's a discovery-driven process, and it's a process by which, when you do discovery-driven learning, you've got to be prepared to have false starts, missteps, and even failures. And the other thing about innovation is, frankly, it can be exhilarating, but mostly it's intellectually and emotionally very taxing. So that is the reality of innovation. And the thing we know, if we look at history, is there always have been many very well-intentioned, talented groups of people who've not been able to come up with anything that is new and useful. So most innovation efforts actually don't work out so well. And in fact, that is often attributed to this idea that there were too many cooks in the kitchen. You know, no one would follow the vision, if you will. But you know what? As one of the leaders we studied said, you can never have too many cooks in the kitchen, particularly when you want to address the kinds of challenges and opportunities that we're interested in addressing. You always have to have too many cooks in the kitchen. You always need tons of talent. Your role as a leader is to get those individuals, those top chefs, to want to cook a delicious, nutritious meal that people will pay for, right? Because we're talking about doing good and doing well. So how do you lead in a way that that happens? Well, again, what we see is what these leaders focus on is, you know what, how do I set the stage that these people want to work together? It's not about me being the visionary out front. And in fact, all of the people we've studied have been visionaries. I mean big-time visionaries. We even got a chance to spend a little bit of time with President Mandela. So I'm talking about people that have vision that could take up all the space in this room. And one of the most important things you're going to have to do as leaders and talented people with imagination is get out of the way and make space for other people, because it is truly a collective activity, which we refer to as collective genius. So what you see in these organizations that can innovate is they are communities with a very strong sense of shared purpose. Purpose matters a lot. It's what allows us, it glues us together, that helps us want to work through and take the risks together, do the hard work, stay persistent on doing what we all believe is important work. So instead of focusing on vision, these leaders focus on why we're doing the work. What is our collective identity that holds us together so that we can continue to do what we need to do? So there are three capabilities that are really critical, and last night they came up. One is something that is referred to as creative abrasion, and that is, can you create a marketplace of ideas through debate and discourse? So what leaders of innovation know is that their job is to amplify difference, not minimize it. Those differences of opinion are actually the resources we need to figure out a solution. So what they really worry about is the person with the minority voice speaking up, and are we hearing that person? That is the focus of their work. So in these organizations, not only do people listen and inquire, I guess actively listen as we put it in inquire, but they also advocate for their point of view. It is a competition of ideas. So we need that diversity, we need that conflict, we need it to be healthy. The second capability is what is referred to as creative agility. And this is the one that most organizations are really focused on right now, and I think it's because we're all trying to deal with the digital. And this is, how do you help an organization, an ecosystem, a team, figure out how to test and refine the ideas they've come up with quickly? How do you pursue them? How do you get data, feedback on the ideas, and then adjust? And so what you see in these organizations is that they understand that it's not so much about doing pilots, because when you do a pilot, if it doesn't work, something was wrong or someone was wrong. There's a whole lot of politics around that. You got to be very careful about it. Instead, they want to figure out, how do we do the experiments that will allow us to discover or act our way to a solution as opposed to plan for a solution. And so that experimentation idea and getting that capability in your organization is a really, really hard one, as I know many of you in the room are trying to sort of figure that out, because that's what I'm frequently asked about, particularly when I come to work with incumbent organizations. Now, the final capability is what we refer to as creative resolution, and we could not come up with a better way of talking about this, but this is about how you do decision-making. Do you do decision-making in a way that's more integrative, that is more both and as opposed to either or? Because we know that most innovations are combinations of ideas. They're not totally new. There's sometimes two, old idea, new circumstance, two ideas, old ideas to a new problem. So unless you can do decision-making in a way in which you can combine those ideas, you're not going to get the innovative solution. So what you see in these organizations is they don't let one group dominate. They don't let the bosses dominate. They don't let the experts dominate. The experts, according to Steve Jobs and all the people at Pixar, they're the most dangerous people of all. We can talk more about that if you want to, which is why I always have a young person. The other piece of the puzzle that is really important is they have to have a more patient and inclusive way of doing decision-making if they're going to be able to combine those ideas, but you actually have to have very, very clear decision-making rights. Because when you don't have clear decision-making rights, things get so muddied. So you got to have those, but you still have a patient and inclusive method of doing things. You also, I guess I didn't say this, which is really the thing that we see in so many organizations, you're not willing to compromise. You will not go along to get along. You're going to continue, if you will, to have the healthy fight, to get those ideas combined, even the ones that seem to be in conflict. So those are the capabilities. They also build a culture to support those capabilities. And as I said, we called the culture a community culture. Now, we looked at organizations all around the world in all three sectors, sometimes in organizations that were friendly to innovation, some not so, people in functions that were friendly to innovation, some not so. And we saw the same thing here. So the shared purpose was really at the heart of the organization. Why are we together? It was the glue that kept us together. The other piece that kept these organizations together was actually their shared values. And these are very simple to say, but hard to live. Bold ambition, collaboration, learning, and a deep sense of ownership and responsibility to deliver on that shared purpose. There were also rules of engagement or norms for how we are to interact with each other and how we're supposed to think together. Now, these were the grease, if you will, that allowed us to work together. And I only want to mention two. One was respect. Again, very easy word to say. Respect meant that you appreciated that everyone in the organization had a slice of genius. And that's what one of the leaders used to say. Everybody has a slice of genius. If you don't think someone has a slice of genius, fire them. You will never treat them with the dignity that they deserve. Now, that doesn't mean that all slices are equal, okay? But it doesn't. And there's lots of examples of how they dealt with it. But if you don't believe they have a slice and they can't make a contribution, let them go somewhere else where somebody does believe that and will, in fact, allow them to make that contribution. So everyone has one, and everyone has a contribution to make. So what you really want to make sure is you have the beginner's eye, that naive point of view to abrade against the expert. And many, many examples were given of how the person who had the naive eye was the one who would ask the so-called stupid question because they didn't know it was stupid. And often when they ask the stupid question, it's actually getting at first principles. So once when I was talking to one of my economist friends recently, he said to me, my 5-year-old would ask me that question, Linda. Now, I could have been insulted by that, but I got back at him when I told you how I think about rationality, et cetera. I'm thinking, your 5-year-old's really smart. He looked at me like, she's really crazy. But I said, no. I said, I guess I'm asking a first principle question. So when we both found out we had PhDs from the University of Chicago, he's like, oh, you're not as dumb as I thought. So the conversation proceeded. But anyway, it was really interesting that he said that, and I thought, that's interesting that he thinks it's a question that a 5-year-old would ask, because I was actually getting at first principles. So, in fact, he can ask me he's fabulous, and we get along very well. And I just thought, though, that is why you need someone who doesn't really know, right? Who will ask you things, because when they ask those questions, well, why does it have to be that way? That's the provocation that I think the young people in here are trying to do to my generation, and we appreciate those provocations. So what I would say to you, the other one is that you're always, when we're thinking together, you can question anything. So just like I said, you don't want anyone to ever think they've asked a stupid question. That is not the way you build an environment where people will share. But the thing that we do see, if we look at this whole process of how innovation happens, and I can just give you some highlights of it. I'm sorry that I don't have so many stories to tell you about it right now. But what I do want to say is that what I hope you will do, and you have already been doing, but really practice while you're here, how do you help people from other generations who have different points of view? How do you help us actually make sure that we're hearing all the voices in the room, that they're speaking up and we're hearing them? How do you help us be bolder about the experiments we're willing to try? Don't let us say, oh, that can't happen. Say, let's try it. How can we design an experiment to test this and learn from it and make a step in the direction we're going? And then we all have to be prepared to support each other as we have missteps and maybe even failures, because we have to have moral conviction and courage to keep this up. And then the other thing, in terms of the decision-making, I hope that you will encourage all of us, through the ways that you behave, to understand that we need to combine our ideas. Because for sure, to deal with the dilemmas, the real trade-offs that exist when you try to do well and do good, we have to bring together some ideas that look like they don't go together. So push us to keep going in that way and make decisions that will move us in that direction. So I want to say that when I was, right after apartheid ended, I had the privilege of going to South Africa. And a young leader there said to me at the time, he was a teenage leader who led 80,000 people, young people. He said, I hope we can create a gentler capitalism. And so I've always thought, what does that gentler capitalism look like, and what can I do, and what can we each do to create that? I think our three winners have some ideas that are really going to inspire all of us and want us to get up. That's their vision. But then now you got to include the rest of us, because what we know about talented, passionate people is they do not want to follow us to the future. They want to co-create the future with us. Congratulations.
Professors, thank you very much. After telling that professor joke, I was going to ask the professor how thick my slice of genius might be, but I was worried you might say sliver of genius, so I thought better not. Well, it's now my pleasure to invite up the three finalists to discuss their essays and give you a chance to hear their ideas. And it will be done along with an illustration as well, which will be interesting. First time we're trying that. We're also going to then, the professor and myself, ask them a few questions and open it up, of course, to you to be able to ask them questions too. We'll try and get through this without grilling them too much, I hope. They missed some of the interesting past experiences we've had where they had a hard time. But please let me invite up our three finalists. We have Natalie Lau, who's from the University of Pennsylvania. Please come up, Natalie, grab a seat. Originally from Hong Kong. We have Ruben Mohindi Wambui, who's from Kenya with the University of Geneva. Come on up. And from Yale University, originally Vietnamese, we have Tuan Do. Please, come on up. So we've got a few minutes to question you. Myself and the professor have the first opportunity, but we'll open up very quickly. Professor, perhaps you'd like to lead off with a question to each of them once they've done their presentations. I'm going to ask first, perhaps, Tuan, if you're up there on the end there, you can start with your presentation, and then we're going to ask you some questions. The professor will lead, but let's hear what your idea is first.
So I'm going to present right now, or we're going to share first?
Say again?
So we're going to present right now, or we're going to share first? Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tuan Do, and I'm originally from Vietnam, and currently I'm working a master's degree at Yale School of Management. Before jumping to the main point of our proposal, like what can we do to improve the purposes for capital, I want to talk about the situation that we are in right now. What's wrong with capitalism anyway? What's wrong with businesses? What's wrong with MBA people around the world? I have an MBA degree, by the way, so thank you very much for inviting me here so that I can explain. So in 2013, 6 years ago, Bill Gates made a comparison in a conference that stuck in my mind since then. Right now, we have more funding for baldness treatment or hair loss treatment than we do for malaria, which kills 400,000 people each year, every single year. And the underlying reason behind the phenomenon is because people who die from malaria are poor people in Africa, in Asia, and normally they are not a strategic market for medical companies. And my point here is that short-termism exists, and it exists even in the most socially beneficial industry, healthcare. So we can see, we can understand the magnitude of the problem at hand in other industries, right? So where are we going? Are we hopeless? Fortunately, right now we have hopes, or at least we have signs of hopes. In 2007, impact investing was first coined in a Rockefeller conference. And later in 2011, Michael Porter and Kramer came up with the idea, with the concept of creating shared value, or CSV, arguing that companies can actually earn a lot of money by addressing social issues. And since then, we have seen a lot of examples of companies trying to embrace the CSV concept in their strategy. Through the discussion that we had yesterday and today with Professor Mayer, we can also learn a lot of examples about that, right? About Unilever, about Novo Nordisk. And my favorite example is actually a Swiss company, Vestergaard, for instance. Does it ring any bell? hope that my pronunciation is correct. The problem with that is that right now we can see good examples here and there, some in Switzerland, some in America, some in Vietnam, my hometown, unsystematically. And I want to change that. I want to create an ecosystem for CSV to thrive. And with that mindset, I believe that the government can do a better job in creating the system. So my proposal is to ask the government to change, to reform the tax system, the way we tax companies and individuals, from income-based system into an impact-based system. So previously, when we talk about tax, we talk about how much money you're earning, what's your income. But now I want to switch the conversation into how impactful you are, how impactful your company are, right? So with that, I hope that we can gain two goals out of the proposal. The first one, we're going to give the incentive for companies to go to the same direction. Like all companies are going to the same direction, creating shared value, join hands to solve the problems that we are facing right now. And the more important goal that I want to have here out of the proposal is that we can switch the conversation from money, the conversation between government and companies, from money, into impact, right? So instead of talking like how bad you are, how much resources you're taking away from the society, and how much money you have to pay for that in the form of tax, now we are talking about how good you are, how impactful you are, and you're going to be rewarded for that. And that's the environment that I want to work in. And with that, I do believe that my proposal would have some validity. And I do know that there are going to be concerns regarding to that proposal, like complexity, about fairness, about the budget deficit. But I believe that where there's a will, there's a way. Thank you very much.
Tuan, well done. Thanks very much, Tuan. Natalie, I hand over to you now.
Sure. Thank you, Riz. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Natalie, and it is my honor today to share with you my way of rewiring the purpose of capital. And before I begin, I'd like to ask a question. How many of you remember the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, where millions of families and workers lose their jobs, their income, and their lifelong savings? For the longest time, Wall Street paid little or no regard to the social and environmental impact of their investments. And the 2008 financial crisis just shows us that the blind pursuit of capital accumulation and profit maximization would only lead us to disastrous social consequences. But recently, we start to see a potential game changer, which is impact investment. And it is an investment strategy that seeks social and environmental return alongside the financial one. And according to the Global Impact Investment Network, the asset management under impact investment grew from $8 billion in 2012 to $228 billion in 2018. And it is the fastest growing trend in the investment sector. Not only does this new trend attract development agencies like IFC or World Bank, the largest institutional investors like UBS, Credit Suisse, BlackRock, they begin to put money in renewable energy projects, sustainable agriculture, and financial inclusion, just to name a few examples. But is this the end game of finance, now that we combine finance and social into one? Not really. Every single impact investment conference that I go to, one question always comes up. How do we measure impact? Where is the evidence? And this is a $1 million question, because rigorous impact, to capture impact, we require rigorous data collection and analysis method, and this is something that is very foreign to a lot of people in the sector. And in order for us to catalyze the impact investment industry, it is of utmost importance that we improve the existing impact measurement practices. And to this end, I'd like to propose a bold yet much needed solution, which is an open source impact database for impact investment. It is a one-stop shop for impact investors and impact analysts to get access to data and metrics to help evaluate the impact of the investment. So how do we do it? There are 3 parts. First, it is a global impact taxonomy that would lay out a clear and standardized set of impact area and impact metrics so that investors have a common understanding of what impact actually is. Let's say in renewable energy, we can measure it by the percentage of carbon reduction. So these sort of common set of metrics would allow investors to know what data points to collect and to help them to actually scale up their portfolio. Second, an impact baseline and impact benchmark. Understanding what impact means is not enough. It is more important to understand how much they're contributing, how much impact they're contributing to society. And to that, I'd like to leverage administrative and research literature to construct an impact baseline and impact benchmark for each impact area so that investors can compare, the impact performance of different portfolio companies is, just like how S&P 500 and Dow Jones Index works. Finally, I would like to include a deal share platform into the database because reconstructing impact measurement practices is, basically the architecture of improving impact investment. But most importantly, we have to attract more deal flows. And to that, this deal share platform would allow asset manager to share the impact data or impact performance of the portfolio companies, not only to hold portfolio companies accountable to their impact, but also to allow more information circulation to facilitate capital flow and also more in co-investment opportunities. And these are the essential part of the open source impact database. And I admit, implementing this database is not without challenges because of the number of stakeholders involved, as well as the financial interests involved. However, as global challenges like climate change and also food insecurity continue to threaten the long-term development of our society, impact investment serves as a golden opportunity for us to rewire the purpose of capital and redirect capital for a greater solution. And I believe the impact database would help us to achieve this goal. And I would like to end my presentation with a quote by former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. He once said, "There's no plan B because there's no planet B. It is more important now than ever to rewire the purpose of capital through impact investment for the sake of collective prosperity." Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ruben. I'm doing my master's in international economics at the Graduate Institute in Geneva, and I'm an aspiring public sector leader. I'm here to speak about systemic interventions for sustainable financing. Why systemic? As Professor Hill said, everyone is cooking. Everyone is cooking solutions to make capital be allocated towards purposeful ventures. Everyone is cooking solutions for sustainability. And what does the current landscape look like? As it stands, many organizations have aligned their business models to an ESG framework, not only at the company level, but also at the industry level, with such initiatives as the Global Impact Investing Network. Apart from that, we have green accounting, which is traditionally very popular in terms of, from your financial statements, making adjustments for some non-financial factors just to arrive at a truly quote-unquote green bottom line. Apart from that, we are having green bonds that are being offered, with the first green bonds offered by the World Bank and BNP Paribas in 2017. As if that is not enough, the world is pushing much faster than that and saying, why can't we link our investment modules as institutional investors to SDGs? And that is happening where we have SDG-linked investment modules. For example, the CDC group, the UK private arm, has linked all their investment prospectus to the SDGs, and the same with pension funds in the Netherlands. But amidst all that is happening within this space, what is the problem with this? The first challenge is that the sustainability landscape is quite wide. Look at the SDGs. We have 17 SDGs. Within them, we have 169 targets. and within them we have 232 initiatives. So as it stands, the landscape is already complex. Beyond that, global accounting standards are not aligned to any sustainability outcomes, and what we have are industry initiatives such as the Sustainability Accounting and Standards Board, which are self-led, industry-led, self-regulated mechanisms. The other problem is that, other than the complexity of many actors, the whole vibe about green economy, circular economy, has become more of a PR language other than actual impact. And what we see is greenwashing happening around. And while I agree with green bonds, the landscape of green bonds is not enough. Why? Morgan Stanley estimated that by end of last year, the green bonds we have will be valued at $250 billion. Just to give you context, the US bond market alone is more than $41 trillion. So that's a very small drop in the ocean. So what vision do I want to cast? The first is that I believe we need to have financial reporting and financial standards be aligned to sustainability. And what does this look like? If we can have the Financial Accounting and Standards Board and the International Accounting and Standards Board come up with one mechanism, one accounting standards, where instead of having micro disjointed industry-led regulations, we introduce sustainability into the traditional regulation framework. And a good place to start will be to start with industry initiatives and pick up from there. Secondly, we've been speaking about shareholders all through the symposium, but we know capital is made up of both debt and equity. No one is talking about debt holders. What about them? I propose that within the bond rating system, let us introduce sustainability metrics so that we have sustainability enhanced bond ratings, so that if a bond is a BBB bond, we have a BBB bond, but probably it's an S1, S2, or S3 bond, so you can know what sustainability metric does it meet. And how is it going to happen? This is asking the credit rating agencies to introduce rating nomenclatures in addition to the risk management framework. The last two proposals is that, one, we need to have within banking regulation, and in particular the Financial Stability Board and the Basel Committee, we have to introduce sustainability initiatives and incentives within banking regulation so that regulators of global banking industry are not only looking at risk management in the context of financial risk, but also in the context of non-financial risk that affects the planet, that affects the climate, and everything that affects our lives. And lastly is about impact attribution. How do we do this? Apart from having like chief sustainability officers in organizations at the C-suite level, I will introduce that even at the board position, we introduce sustainability board position so that we have someone at the board level who is mandated with a task of ensuring that within the board strategy, sustainability attribution happens and verification. Thank you very much.
So well done, Tuan, Natalie, and Ruben. Really nice presentations. I know you feel under a lot of pressure, but think of it, you've come out of so many hundreds of essays to be the top 3, and we'll be looking at how that ranks in a little while. But as promised, I want to give Professor Linda Hill a chance to ask you a couple of questions each, maybe, on your essays and anything she might have thought about there.
So I'm first going to give you an easy one. What question do you want me to ask you? Answer it. You only had 5 minutes, so what question do you want to have so you can have another minute to tell us something?
So I would like to hear the question about like what would I do if I have more time and more real estate in the essay to write about? Because I believe that because of the word limitation, we cannot express everything. We cannot, you know.
You got one. I'm giving you 1 minute to do that. What would be the next? What would the next page say?
Can I take more than 1 minute?
No. 2 questions.
Okay.
Just 2 questions.
So my idea is mainly about CSV and how we can empower businesses to embrace CSV concept in their business strategy. And so I come up with the idea of tax reform because I want to get governments involved in the system, and they should be the active role in creating that system, that ecosystem through tax reform. But there should be more than that we're talking about, because right now we want to change the behavior of people and behavior of firms. Then we need to consider the why, the how, and the what. The why is quite obvious because the problem is there. We have to change. The how is also mentioned in the essay in my idea of tax reform, but we haven't talked much about the what. The message right now is about CSV, right? The company has to consider about solving the problems and earning money at the same time. But there's the one connotation in the definition that I'm not really happy about CSV is that when we talk about CSV and when we talk about how we can work on a CSV kind of company, we talk about the number one in the list is that work for the company that have good products. And for me, somehow it's not inclusive. Doing good by doing well. First, you have to do good, right? You have to have good products. How about the other companies who don't have good products? I mean, the companies, by nature, they don't have good products, like Coca-Cola, like Pepsi, like tobacco companies.
You mean good products in the sense that they do harm to their customer? Or
that's right. Then
is that, I mean, just what do you mean by good?
So, exactly. So when the products are not good themselves, right? Then when in the room people are talking about we are doing good by doing well, we are focusing on the good products, and then, for example, you're working for sugar water maker, right, company, then you're thinking, oh, our product is not that kind of product. Maybe that's not the field that we have to play.
Okay, so
the mentality is,
can we actually ask the question, should we be in that business in the first place? Is that part of what you're saying?
I would not argue that, but I think that we should have a more inclusive message when we deliver to everybody, so that even for companies that are producing harmful products, they can feel that they are part of that.
Oh, I see. That they'd have a role to play.
Exactly. It's not like just do good by doing well, but maybe doing better. Because, for example, for tobacco companies, right, if you're improving your products, then you're actually reducing the lung cancer rate. Mm-hmm. So somehow I think it's creating like value for the society. Maybe even, I don't know, but maybe even better than focusing on how to solve the problem.
So if I could just, because I am going to let the other two speak and tell me what question, but one of the things that you need to do, what you want to do with tax reform, is actually have ways of measuring impact.
That's right.
And the definition of impact you'd like to be as broad as possible, and to include, so not just the products and services, exactly, maybe you're in a business. I remember this is a new problem for me. A person called me and said, I'm in the cannabis business. Will I get into the Harvard Business School? How do I write my essay? I said, I don't know what the Harvard Business School will do about that because I'm not on the admissions committee.
That's right.
But I suppose, how do you do your business? Do you do it in a way that children aren't attracted to take that drug or whatever it might be? And so it was an interesting set of conversations that I found myself having with them, because I've never had the cannabis conversation until this year, I will tell you, and so I'm looking forward to others. But what you want us to do is have really take into account as much as we possibly can in evaluating impact. Now, you two have ideas about how to assess impact in part, but what question do you wish I would ask you so you could have another minute?
Well, I guess why impact investments?
Okay.
Okay.
You didn't get to tell us about that before? You want to tell us more about it?
Sure.
Okay.
I guess I'll start with a story. I am a sociology undergrad, and then so growing up, like watching the 2000 financial crisis unfold, I really hated finance. I was like, wow, corporate greed. But then as I started to work at my first job in a think tank, I begin to notice something called impact investment. And I can see that a lot of, not just, development agencies or, philanthropic organization putting money in like, socially purposeful businesses, a lot of the investors or big banks, they're actually also devoting their resources and time to see how they can create positive changes in the world. And this is something very surprising to me. And I often have that question like, wow, like, can we actually use capital for greater purpose? And I guess given all the evidence that we have right now, the answer is yes. But when I dig deeper into the impact investment industry, what I notice is that putting my research hat on, how flimsy and how fragmented the impact measurement practice is. And this is a problem because you can't claim you're doing impact investment without capturing any impact. This is just, as Ruben said, is impact washing. And so I guess, the reason why I'm so passionate about impact investment is that I truly believe that capital is a means, that could lead us either, to more socially impactful solution or, back to, corporate greed and to designate financial crisis. And I tend to believe in the former. So
I think a little bit of truth in advertising. Until 3 or 4 months ago, I was on the board of State Street, which is one of those those evil banks, I guess, that we can talk about,
right.
and how we sort of dealt with some of the dilemmas, both looking back and seeing what role we had to play in it and what we needed to do going forward.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I was trying to figure out, when you said Coca-Cola, I didn't hear banking there, but we picked it up there. I'm not off the bank because of any kind of issue like that. I'd been on the bank board too long, and I think you should have turnover. So I turned myself over. Right? Okay. Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Good. I wish school was this easy that you get to choose your question and your answer. I think the question I would want to answer is, what do I view as the biggest threat to sustainability and the way we are doing it? And I think my view on the biggest threat is that there is so much happening, disjointed, a lot of havoc happening. Let me give you an example. We have different ESG ratings and benchmarks. And apart from that, we have organizations that actually rate companies based on ESG frameworks. Then we have a global organization that has been set up. It's a company that actually rates these raters of ESG frameworks. This is actually true, and they have a report you can Google. It's called Rate the Raters Report on sustainability. And the report, the 2018 version, say that there are at least over 600 ESG ratings and benchmarks globally. And I imagine, as corporate heads, if in the organization you do not do things in a haphazard way, and you want focus, why would we want to imagine that at a global level if we do not coordinate and come up with systemic interventions that we're actually going to have a good and proper global solution? So I am more than convinced that if we are going to actually move the needle in terms of sustainability and long-termism, we need to move to systemic interventions. And we just need to stop all these small duplicated solutions and just arrive at some level of efficiency. Otherwise, I think that is the biggest threat to sustainability today.
So my next question, if I can ask one more, is what's the first action you would recommend we take to start making progress on your agendas? I don't care which one of you starts.
I think for me is institutionalize sustainability into global regulation frameworks, especially financial reporting, because what we have...
I'm going to make you be a little bit more specific.
Yes.
What does that mean? Who are you going to talk to? Who do you want to make? What's the specific action you think we should take to move us forward? So start the process.
Practical solution would be, we have industry-led initiatives, like the Sustainability Accounting and Standards Board. Currently, they have 77 standards on sustainability. I will initiate conversations between them and the two biggest financial reporting boards in the world and see how do we maybe have new IAS standards or IFRS standards that are going to actually target on sustainability and move beyond risk management and shareholder and society protection.
Okay. Yeah. Yes?
For me, I believe that it's going to be a partnership between governments and NGOs and other companies for impact measurement. Because when I share my idea with my friends and my professors, the first thing they tell me was always about the concern about how you're gonna measure the impact before you can come up with a fair tax rate. Mm-hmm. So I believe that, and the good thing right now is that there are many NGOs trying to work on, measuring the impact of firms and companies. For example, GIIRS, like Global Impact Investing Rating System, is one outstanding NGO that I could find out there. They are rating firms based on the impact from all three levels, from reconceiving products and services, from improving internal operation, and also from improving the external environment. So with a lot of questions they measure the impact of one company, they rate it AAA, BBB, C, D, things like that. Things very similar to the finance system that we have right now. And I believe that for governments, we don't have to go from scratch. We can partner with these NGOs, NPOs, and learn from them and scale it up. I think that's the first thing that we should do.
Sure.
Yeah.
So this first step that I could think of is riding on the existing good work that organizations has already been doing. Because my idea is like, inspired by existing actors like the IFC Impact Investment Principle as well as the Global Impact Investment Network. And they're currently already doing things to kind of approach the impact taxonomy. So my first step is to kind of, propose a solution and suggest that, hey, I know that you're doing great things, but can we take one step further and to kind of give them that insight, saying you can actually do like an impact benchmark and also create an infrastructure for DoShare platform, and there are already stakeholders who are committed to this action. So I guess my first step is to kind of provide them with this idea and say that let's ride on the existing good work that you're doing, but take one step further.
Okay. Professor, excellent questions gave us a deeper perspective on the issues that each of these finalists has covered. I'm going to actually squeeze into questions in between our participants. As I say, I always like to think of you as participants, not audience. You're not passive, you're here to take part. So I'm going to open it up now. We've got microphones. Please put your hands up if you have questions. Keep them brief so we can get as many of you in as possible, and tell us to whom you'd like to direct the question. And we'll get the microphones to you. So do put your hands up clearly. We've got one in the middle there, went up first. Thank you. A bit of lighting and help there. That's good. Thank you. Get one to you too. Tell us your name and where you're from as well. That'll give us some idea of...
Hi, I'm Dmitry Lokin. I'm from Moscow, Russia. I want to ask Mr. Du, my colleague, how can you fight with the possible manipulation of the taxation issue? Because you probably can manipulate that pretty easily if you want to, right? How can we fight that? I really like your idea, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
He's not family, is he?
No, I didn't pay him for that. So, yeah, that's a very good question to think about it, because that's also the reaction that I got a lot from my friends. Like, are you going to give the companies the right to report themselves? Are they going to manipulate the numbers and the impact they're going to have for the society, right? And corruption as well. Corruption is also a very serious problem that we have to think about. So I think that right now many companies are working on triple bottom lines, right? However, there is only one bottom line that we have the big four firms to audit your accounting practices, right? Why don't we have the auditors for the other two? So I believe that we can do that. We can implement that if we have a third party like trustworthy enough for us to implement. And the NGOs and NPOs that I just mentioned are one of the resources that we rely on, because right now they're working on that. They have been working on the problem for many years, and I believe that they are subjective enough to stand in between the government and the firms. So I believe that we can rely on that. And in the future, maybe that's also another market for companies, for private sector to jump in and tackle the auditing practices. Like
Tuan, I was going to also throw in this concept of social impact taxation. Did you consider how in some cultures, in some religions, there's almost that kind of social impact taxation built in? You have zakat in Islam, for example. You have alms for the poor in the Christian world as well. There's sometimes those kind of factors built in. How would that equate into or come into your equation?
Oh, that's a perfect question. So I think that it depends on each country and each timeline of one country, right? They have to have the priority, like which industry and which needs I want right now. And so basing on that, we can have a customized system for that. In my essay, I mentioned several situations where maybe even two people working in the same industry, same products, but because of different market target that they want to aim for, they're going to enjoy different tax rates, both for the corporate income and for individual income. And I believe that it depends on the needs of the society, the specific society that they are operating in, that we have the priority. So.
Thank you, Tuan. We had another question there. Okay, I'll try and get to it. We've got a lady there in the middle coming up in a minute.
So, yes, I'm Peter, and my deepest congratulations to all of you.
A little closer.
And my question is also for all three of you. Specifically, when measuring impact, how do you plan to measure the right impact in case the background has a very strong technological aspect? For example, in climate change, if the right scientists were heard from the start, we would have been having the climate discussion 30 years ago.
Okay.
What is your view?
We'll get one brief answer from each, then, if I may. Ruben first.
I think measuring impact, the way I see it, the best approach will be an outcome approach. So for this, let me contextualize it for the SDGs, for example, right? So the SDGs are, your big goals. But if you go to the 232 initiatives, they are very specific, outcomes that say, for example, if you want to have gender equality, right? What does that actually look like within the context of organization? So I think my impact assessment will be so as companies report, they have to say with their actions, what particular outcome are they able to meet, and how well are they, and how much are they failing? And this has been done at a country level because we have the SDGs index and dashboard, which is done by the UN, but this is a country level. So I think just customizing that at an organization level and focusing on outcomes. Yeah.
Okay, Natalie?
Yeah, just around Weben's point about outcome-based measurement, I totally agree with that. But I'll also add that it's very hard, to decide, the right impact, because impact in itself can be very subjective. But I guess the best that we could do, again, riding on the existing good work that a lot of, the rating agencies are doing, like GEARS, IRIS, B-Lab, we can always find in the impact area certain common sets of metric system, to measure impact. There's no arguing, in order to measure the impact of climate change, we should measure, carbon reduction, right? And so we can and also we can ride on the good work that a lot of, academics are doing. There's actually a lot of research literature supporting, certain impacts would or certain data points would actually be the key evaluation definition or outcome for certain impact area. So I think we can, leverage different resources and see, how we can come up with a common set of metrics. I wouldn't say the perfect impact because, again, very subjective, but the best that we can do, again, to scale up the industry is to find a common and standardized set of impact metric that is backed by research. Yeah.
Okay, Tuan, a quick answer, please.
Yeah, very quick. Coming back to my previous point, I believe that for the right impacts, right, it should be, so the standard and the priority that I mentioned before, it should be a living thing. It should be moving, it should be changing every year, or depending on the needs of the society and the community that you're operating in. So it shouldn't be a fixed thing, it should be a living thing.
Professor, any thoughts on what you've heard here? Any comments?
Well, one of the things in talking about the countries, et cetera, one thing I've begun to wonder about a bit, because we've been talking about globalization as well. On the one hand, you all want standard ways of looking at impact, it sounds like. On the other hand, I'm hearing answers that sound like they need to be localized, which you really hold a particular organization to. So how do you sort of balance that global, local? These are complex questions that you're dealing with, but we got two local answers from people who sort of also were proposing global standards so that we all could agree on them. So how does that work?
So I actually think they're not mutually exclusive. So the way I think about it is so you do your standard setting at the global level, but you actually do your impact assessment at the corporate level, such that the outcomes that the companies hold themselves accountable to have actually been determined at a global regulatory platform, and not really from self-reporting or industry-led initiatives and that kind of thing. So I think they're actually not a conflict, because you're going for global interventions, but saying we want to see implementation at the localized level. And
so one of the questions that I have, and let me see if I can pose this correctly. So as I said, I also study globalization. So this where decision-making rights should reside globally, locally, is something that I worry about. When I was on the board of the Rockefeller Foundation, we spent a lot of time thinking about how do you get the so-called, I don't know what words we're using now, developed countries to interact with the emerging countries and make sure that you balance the power in a way that the needs of all are considered. So remember, one thing that really I was naive about is that many emerging market companies did not have the money to send their people to the trade negotiations, to even send them. And so we began to talk more about South-South versus North-South.
Yeah.
So when you put together these collections of people to think through these questions, I mean, would you have the South-South as opposed to North-South when you first started, or would you mix the, and those are, am I being confusing? Perhaps I am. So who would you, how do you balance the power between those? Because powerlessness is deeply corrupting, I think, right?
Yeah.
So how do you actually get the conversation, since our countries are all in different places in our development, right? And what we need to get done and what our priorities are. How do you balance the power between the more powerful countries, if you will, and the ones that, for a range of reasons, are not so powerful? So that what we end up with is actually something that captures the reality that's important to both. Because we're obviously interdependent and interconnected, but how do you have the conversation in a way that people, that we do hear all voices, if you will?
And in response to that question, I think impact investment is kind of connecting the North and the South, because most of the impact capital come from like North America, like United States or Canada or in Europe, and it all a lot of the money goes to Latin America and also Sub-Saharan Africa. And I think this is one way of channeling more capital and to empower those so-called emerging or developing countries. And you can always criticize me saying like microfinance is the same thing, but what happened is that it seems like these impact investors are kind of creating loan dependency in emerging market, so that they would keep repaying their debt, and instead of lifting them out of poverty, it plunges them further into poverty. But I guess in this day and age, we can kind of see that these sort of predatory practices in investment is not sustainable, because instead of helping the emerging market, instead of growing the market and growing your financial return, you're actually just creating short-termism and short-term return. So I think that a more longer-term look at investment and to look at development will actually help to balance the power between the so-called developed and developing countries. But that's just my opinion.
If I may, I'm going to put it back out. Oh, go on. Try a quick answer. I'm going to get it out to the audience after that board participant.
Keep going.
After you, go on.
Oh, so I want to answer the previous question actually about the globalization and also localization, right? For my proposal, I believe we can have both in the same solution. Like we can have a standardized test for companies, like we have a standardized system so that everybody has to be on the same standard income in terms of the impact. But then basing on the current needs of each country or each community, we should have a weighting system for that, and through that we can have different rates from different period of time in the same country. So it's both standardized but also localized.
Okay, I'm going to, the young lady with the blue-grey coat was next. I know the gents there. I see the hands going up. I'll try to get to you, and I've got a couple of scholar questions to come in a second as well.
Hey, thank you. My name is Linda Du. I'm a classmate of Mr. Doe at Yale University. And my question is actually for Natalie and Ruben. So my original question was actually similar to the one that my fellow Linda just posed. And it was about how would you coordinate stakeholders to set a dominant standard. But let me ask a follow-up question instead. So say you've decided on that common standard. How do you persuade stakeholders whose voices were maybe not necessarily as loud? How do you persuade all stakeholders to jump on board with that common framework?
Okay, maybe Ruben, go first.
I think convincing them, well, so the way I think about it is about like mindsets and trying to convince organizations that there is something in for them if we actually endorse like these global practices. Because I imagine for an organization, the problem actually is not how to actually convince them, is what value proposition do you actually, it's more of a framing problem than whether you need to convince them or not. Because if there's value proposition for me as a CEO of, say, a Kenyan company, and and I'm convinced that adopting this set of standards will mean sustainable production, will mean green ethos for my business, then probably there's much more less convincing to do, and maybe the question becomes, how do I actually do it, and what does the transition look like? Because you want to be very strategic and how you transit, because you don't. It has to be very systematic within the organization and communicate it within the organization. And I think this is practical, and this is something I've been involved in doing in engaging stakeholders and convincing them, because just for disclosure, I used to be a consultant before grad school. I worked for McKinsey, and much of what we will end up doing is convincing C-suite executives and saying, okay, what we are proposing to you is actually a big task because this is what you tasked us to do, but you also need to take them through that transformation process of changing their mindset to be able to endorse the new ideas, because as we all know, people resist change. So it's more value proposition and getting them through a how approach, but not really whether you're going to convince them or not.
All right. Natalie?
My quick response is that I don't need there needs to be much convincing, because investors are already demanding for a standard. And this is from my experience of doing impact investment research and also interaction with a lot of investors. The thing is that impact investment is so new that a lot of the investors, they don't really know what impact is. A lot of the VC firms that I met with, they say like, oh yeah, hey, they're doing good stuff, let's invest in it, without knowing, oh, how do you measure impact and what impact actually is. So I would say that, and also measuring impact is such a resource-intensive process that a lot of the times they don't really have the expertise or resource to do it. So a lot of the investors actually asking organizations that does impact measurement is like, how do we measure it? Can you give me some sort of data? Can you give me some insight? So again, in the market, a lot of them, they're already demanding for like a standardized approach. And the other part of the answer is that while I'm not saying that I'm imposing a common set of standard, I think there should be some sort of consultation. Like, for example, after I roll out the impact taxonomy and impact baseline, you can always consult like the investor, hey, this is too demanding, or is it too much for you to measure? So we can always adjust how standardized that is. And I would say that involves a lot of stakeholder engagement process. And so yeah, that would be my response.
Okay, we have two members of the academic jury, two of our scholars. I'm going to ask them to stand up, and maybe we can get the microphone. They can just quickly put out a question each before we carry on.
Hi, I'm Katrin.
Katrin? Yeah.
I have a question for Antoine. So your proposed taxation system could incentivize companies who do not rank so well on the positive impact scale to relocate to countries with a more traditional taxation system. And with that, you might lose the income from those taxes and also the talent. What are your ideas? How could you mitigate these dynamics?
Can you elaborate a little bit more so that, like, how you're talking about the tax that we gain from those companies, and how we're going to...
It's sort of following up Linda's question on global versus local implementation, and probably these initiatives will first be implemented on a local basis. And then if you look on the time horizon, companies might have an incentive to move to another country, but this is not yet implemented, and they will pay lower taxes. And with that,
tax-based brain drain, basically, yeah.
I see. That's a good question. I think that it depends on the barrier when you want to invest in one company here and one company there. If you have any barrier between, then maybe you can roll out a system. But if you have no barrier at all, then I suggest that we should implement the system for the entire area. For example, two companies within one country, right? So I don't think that we should like roll out in one province and then to the next province, because I believe that having good influences is not as strong as eliminating the bad influences. So if we're focusing on just one example and we are ignoring the others, and maybe for short term, right, investor will prefer the others and leaving the one that we are applying at very serious disadvantage. So I think that it depends on the barriers that.
Maybe Patrick will do one.
Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, my name is Patrick. I'm from ETH Zurich, and I have a question for Ruben. You mentioned in one of your solutions was the appointment of a non-executive board member being responsible for CD. CDG monitoring, attribution and verification. And so I was wondering, because to me, it seems really similar to CSR measures. So what are the risks of greenwashing implementing these measures, and what are the corporate measures that can mitigate this risk?
So if we say, so taking a step back, so I'm proposing sustainability board members, just to be sure I get it correctly, and saying, well, maybe within the board we already have someone who's already taking care of CSR initiatives, right? I think in that particular case, then there is no need to actually duplicate and find a new board member for it. And what will be more useful is to shift the description of that board position more from a CSR charity perspective to say, well, let's focus on sustainability, and as Professor Meyer had said earlier, right? Stop seeing sustainability as part of, the CSR bandwagon of, let's do good, let's give back to what the cause is, but just change the way, business is done. And just as a last point, I think the whole aspect of these ideas is not to get to the very perfect solution. My obsession with this is, let's get to a workable solution. So if we can actually change the role of a board member and expand the scope to include sustainability, and it works well and good, because also I think in the process of us trying to get to the very perfect of solutions, time is running out. There's still pollution happening and so much that is happening. As soon as we get something workable, I'll say let's run with it until we get something better.
Okay. By the way, I'm not ignoring the cheap seats. I'm sorry, the hands in the front went up very quickly, and I promised I'd get the order. The gentleman who's got cramp by now, holding his arm up at the front there. Oh, no, yeah.
There's some way in the back.
Yeah, there's one at the back. I will get to you as well, don't worry. I was going in the order they came up, and the front lot just shot up quickly.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Noah, and somebody who's a social entrepreneur, but also has worked for an impact measurement company. I have a challenge to all of you, and as much as I believe that measurement is important, there's also some downsides. For example, some impact is more easily quantifiable than others. Yep. And that can lead to certain impact that only, for example, has a long-term impact, maybe that only shows in 20 years, maybe in education, or some effects that only show in 20 years. They don't really work with the investment cycles. It's really hard to hold people accountable to that. So, and if you then put in financial incentives also on the quantifiable measures, that just might mean that certain kinds of impact might get much stronger investments, and others that maybe are not so easily quantifiable, like education or plastic, that they might fall under the table. And that's why I'm afraid that, really, it would drain out the intrinsic motivation that already exists to solve some of the big but unmeasurable challenges. That's my challenge.
No.
Well, and that's a very good point, and I completely agree with you. So that is why impact investment is just a stream of using capital to do social good. And that's why we can't completely eliminate philanthropy, because there's always a space for, more risk capital or, more, patient way of solving social problem that might not necessarily yield a financial return in the short run. Let's say education, for example, is again very hard to just use one single measure to measure education outcome. And that is why standardized tests is a very disappointing way of measuring education outcome. So my answer would be, impact investment is just one way of using capital to solve social problems, and we need different sort of ways to actually contribute to these global challenges, and philanthropy is a very important component too. So
right. I'm just being told here we've got a minute left. I thought we'd started late, so we might have more time, but we have 1 minute. So I'm going to ask Professor Linda Hill to just give a little summary comment on what you've heard. What's your impression?
Well, these are very complex problems that you're trying to address, and I do think that developing, I don't know for lack of a better word, an action plan of who would you really start to talk with, and how would you do this, being very concrete about what the conversations need to be and who needs to be in the room, and how do you build the base to get where you're going is something that I would encourage you all to do, because it is a leadership challenge. The other thing, and with regard to that, is I don't know how much time you'll have to spend together. The three of you, literally, together, to sort of write one proposal. I'm going to give you a challenge. How would you combine, you have similar, you're in the same space. Have the creative abrasion, figure out, and come back to us with the plan that you'd like all of us to help you move along on. And I mean it very seriously. Because you represent different parts of the world, different points of view, but connected enough to have a cohesive, a shared purpose. And if the three of you can't get it done, then you can practice leading innovation amongst yourselves, because you got to bring the rest of us in on this one. It's a complicated one that you're going to have to break down into pieces. I think the smaller pieces to know that you're making some progress in what you want to get done.
Sure, I'm down.
Is that fair?
Yeah, challenging.
Yeah.
Yep. They seem like good people.
Yeah. Right?
Start with them.
I have to say, I've been very honored to be up here with Professor Linda Hill, because, again, when you have such smart questions, it's really endearing as well and encouraging, and hearing the responses were very good as well. Many of you probably know the story of the professor who walked into his class with the glass jar. Do you know the...
No, I don't, and I'm a little bit afraid of this one, too. But go ahead.
It was very smart. He came in with a big empty glass jar. He pulled it up when the students were sitting there. He said, "Okay, let's have your hands raised on who thinks this jar is empty." And they all put their hands up. He said, "Well, no, okay, good." He pulled out from underneath a bucket of golf balls, and he filled the jar with golf balls to the top. And he said, "Okay, now who thinks it's full?" So they all put their hands up. He said, "Really? Okay." Then he pulled out a bucket of small gravel and started pouring it in as he shook the golf balls, and the gravel filled the spaces between the golf balls. He said, "Anyone think it's empty now?" They all applauded, and they said, "No, it's full." You know, they all had their hands up. "It's full now." He said, "Really?" And he pulled out a bucket of sand. And he filled it with the sand, and that filled in the spaces. He said, "Anyone think it's full now?" And they kind of hesitated, but it has to be full now. So he got out a couple of beers and poured the beers in. And he said, "Look, your life is this jar. The golf balls are the important things, your health, your family, the people you love, the really important things in your life. The gravel is the smaller stuff, things that you do day to day, and the errands, and, you do want to get them done, but they're not as important as these golf balls. And then the sand is the trivia. Someone cut you up in traffic, or something's bothering you, ignore it, He said, the trouble is, if you fill the glass jar up with the sand first, there's no room for the important things in your life, So it's very important you don't put the sand in there first and focus on that. And they all applauded. And then one of them said, but one of the students put his hand up. He said, "Well, Professor, what about the beers?" He said, "Well, the point is that no matter how full your life is, there's always room for a couple of beers." Thank
you.
So it's my honor now to invite up another professor, Georg Krogh, who's our jury head, to come up and announce the outcome.
Right. So it's fantastic, actually. Professors used to be boring, and all of a sudden we have become, the target of funny jokes, which is of course great. Now, this is such an incredible honor. It's such a great pleasure to come back here year after year and actually work on the jury to select sort of the best essays in this incredible competition. 750 students from all over the world submitted, about 40% female students submitted essays to this competition. It went into an academic jury first, consisting of 40 PhD students from ETH Zurich, from University of St. Gallen, and they handpicked 10 essays that were sent to the main jury. And in the main jury, we had to make this incredibly difficult choice. And you can see how difficult this choice is by the incredible students that are on stage. I'm just in awe, actually, about your ability to argue, your ability to write. We have seen the written material, which is absolutely astonishing. So, but we still, kind of as a jury, we still have to come up with some sort of 1, 2, 3, 4. No, sorry, 1, 2, 3. Exactly. Professors can't count. I mean, as being at ETH, I should be able to count. So it's sort of, yeah. Well, but in any case, by the way, the selection process is completely blinded. So we have no idea who actually wrote the essays. We're just looking at quality. Before I announce the winners and the ranks, I would like to first extend some thanks. I would like to thank Yannick Miller and the ISC team for an incredible support of the two juries. And just one point of remark. Yannick actually took over this job just a couple of months ago, and he has done a tremendous job in setting this up. My second thanks goes to the academic jury. And it's led by Professor Heike Bruch from University of St. Gallen. I counted, you know, unfortunately, we had this 2,100 words limit, right, on the essay. And I've never seen an essay with less than 2,100 words. And sometimes I wonder if you can actually say even more with a little bit less. But it, you know, it turns out that the students love to use the full set of words available. And if you think about the academic jury, for each member of the academic jury, that comes down to reading 76,000 words in this essay competition. They deserve an enormous hand, you know, for that. Yeah. 76,000 words. That is a lot. And I could see one of my PhD students is actually on the jury, and they could see, you know, getting a little bit more and more tired, and, you know, eventually as the process went on. Now, and of course, also my colleagues in the main jury, thank you very much for great efforts. Now, I come to the announcement of the winners. The jury notes about the essay in the third place that it is excellently written, a set of very powerful arguments, and it offers a very novel perspective on capital as a very theoretical and fairly abstract concept in the essay. The third place goes to Tuando. The jury notes about the essay in the second place that it is highly creative. It is a crossover between finance and information technology. The essay couldn't have been written without a lot of innovation in digital technology, and it's very practice-oriented. The second prize goes to Natalie Lau. If you can count, you know what the winner is, right? But let me say some words from the jury to you. Ruben, you were tackling a critically important topic, namely accounting systems, complex, but still critically important. Brilliant argumentation, excellent grounding in the academic literature, and I think a set of really interesting, provocative, but interesting and great solutions. Very, very practice-oriented. So Ruben, it's a great pleasure for me to hand over the first prize to you.
Good stuff. Close up a beach.
Here is the... Okay. Thank you. And the watch.
Oh, this is fancy.
Okay. This is actually something to take. Okay.
Oh, they get a Swiss watch.
Thank you so much.
Better than chocolates, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we need one more to get.
We have a full
Thank you
session.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you.